Beneath the Montana sun. The stagecoach door swung open, and Eleanor Price stepped into hell disguised as salvation. 9 children tumbled out behind her, hollow-eyed, dust-caked, their lips cracked white from thirst. The Montana sun beat down without mercy, turning Main Street into a furnace. Townspeople lined the wooden walkways, silent as gravestones, their stares heavy with something worse than pity. Fear. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her youngest daughter's shoulder as a shadow fell across them, tall, broad, wearing dust like a second skin. Caleb Mercer, the stranger who'd promised shelter. The man they whispered had buried his first wife in these same unforgiving hills. If you're drawn to stories of courage born from desperation, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far Eleanor's story travels across this country. The heat made liars of them all. Eleanor had learned this truth somewhere between St. Louis and the Montana Territory, watching promises evaporate like morning dew on prairie grass. The advertisement had been simple, almost kind. Widower rancher seeks woman of character. 9 children welcome. Modest home, honest work, dignity restored. She'd answered because dignity was the only currency she had left, and even that was nearly spent. Now, standing in the dust of Cedar Bend with the afternoon sun pressing down like a punishment, Eleanor wondered what other lies the heat had baked into this town. Mrs. Price. The man's voice came low and rough, like stones grinding together. Caleb Mercer moved closer, and Eleanor forced herself not to step back. He was bigger than she'd imagined, not just tall, but built like the mountains that ring this valley, all hard edges and weathered stone. His face bore the kind of lines that came from squinting into too many sunrises, and his eyes held something she couldn't quite name. Wariness, maybe. Or recognition of a fellow survivor. Mr. Mercer. Eleanor kept her chin level, aware of the children clustering behind her skirts like frightened quail. We've come as agreed. So I see. His gaze swept over her brood, lingering on each face. Eleanor watched him count them silently, his expression unreadable. 7-year-old Sarah pressed against her side, still clutching the rag doll that had somehow survived every mile of their journey. 15-year-old Thomas stood slightly apart, his jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded Eleanor so painfully of his father. The others ranged between, their ages written in hunger and exhaustion. Water's in the trough yonder, Caleb said, gesturing toward the livery. Pump works. Let them drink their fill. The children didn't wait for Eleanor's permission. They scattered toward the water like starlings, all except Thomas, who moved with careful dignity, as if remembering he was nearly a man. Eleanor watched them go, her throat tight with relief and something darker. Shame, perhaps, that water from a public trough felt like luxury. The stage leaves in 10 minutes, Caleb continued. He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, creased and worn from handling. Reverend Hutchins is waiting at the church. We can do this now, if you're willing. Or you can get back on that coach and head wherever you were going before you answered my letter. Eleanor looked at him directly then, studying the hard planes of his face in the relentless sunlight. She'd expected many things, cruelty perhaps, or the sort of desperate loneliness that turned men bitter. What she saw instead was exhaustion so deep it had carved itself into bone. And beneath that, a flicker of something almost like hope. Quickly shuddered. I didn't have anywhere else to go, Mr. Mercer. That's why I answered your letter. The honesty came easier than she expected. My husband died 8 months back. Fever took him in 3 days. The bank took our farm in 3 weeks. I've been working laundry and boarding houses ever since, moving town to town, trying to keep my children fed. She paused, watching his face for judgment. I won't lie to you about our circumstances. We come with nothing but ourselves and whatever work we can offer. Fair enough. Caleb folded the letter and tucked it away. I won't lie to you either, Mrs. Price. This town doesn't trust me. Some folks here think I killed my first wife, Clara, pushed her off a cliff or poisoned her, depending on which story you believe. She died 2 years back, fall from a horse, but truth doesn't matter much when people need someone to blame. His voice remained level, but Eleanor heard the edge beneath it. If you marry me, that suspicion falls on you too. Your children will hear the whispers, so I'm giving you the choice now, clean and simple. The heat shimmered between them. turning the street into a wavering dream. Eleanor thought of the boarding house in Billings where she'd spent her last coins on a single room, 9 children sleeping on the floor like cordwood. She thought of Thomas's carefully blank face when she'd told him there was no money for school. She thought of the weight of constant fear, the grinding knowledge that she was one illness, one accident, one stroke of bad luck away from watching her children starve. "Mr. Mercer," she said quietly, "I've learned that most people's opinions aren't worth the breath it takes to speak them. If you're offering my children a roof and food, I'll marry you today and deal with whatever whispers come after." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite a smile, but a lessening of tension. "The Reverend's expecting us. I'll get your bags." "We don't have bags." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "Everything we own, we're wearing." Caleb absorbed this without comment, but she saw the slight tightening around his mouth. Pity or disgust, she couldn't tell which. Then he turned toward the water trough where her children had gathered, their faces dripping, shirts soaked from splashing. "Thomas," he called. "That your name?" Her son straightened, wariness replacing the brief moment of childish pleasure. "Yes, sir." "Need you to help me with the wagon. Rest of you, climb in the back. It's 6 miles to the ranch, and we're losing daylight." The church sat at the far end of Main Street, a simple wooden structure with a cross that cast long shadows in the afternoon sun. Reverend Hutchins waited on the steps, a thin man with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he opened his Bible. The ceremony lasted maybe 5 minutes, long enough for Eleanor to promise things she wasn't sure she could keep, short enough that she didn't have time to reconsider. When Caleb kissed her, it was brief and formal, his lips dry against hers. The Reverend pronounced them married, and just like that, Eleanor Price became Eleanor Mercer, bound to a stranger in a strange land under a sun that showed no mercy. The wagon ride revealed the first lie the heat had hidden. They followed a dirt road that climbed into the hills, leaving Cedar Bend's dusty streets behind. The land here rolled in long golden waves, dotted with sage and the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking where water ran. Eleanor had expected a modest homestead, a small house, maybe a barn, a few acres of struggling crops. What emerged as they crested the final ridge made her breath catch. The ranch sprawled across the valley like something from a fever dream. Pastures stretched toward distant mountains, dotted with cattle that looked like toys from this height. Corrals and outbuildings clustered near a creek that ran silver in the late sun. And the house, it wasn't a house at all, but a structure built from logs and stone that spoke of wealth and permanence. "Jesus and Mary," Eleanor breathed, forgetting herself. "Built it with Clara," Caleb said, not looking at her. She wanted something that would last, something beautiful. The children had gone silent in the wagon bed, their eyes wide. Even Thomas looked impressed, though he tried to hide it. Sarah tugged on Eleanor's sleeve. "Mama, is this really ours?" "Hush now." Eleanor's voice came out sharper than she intended, fear making her cruel. Nothing this grand came without a price, and she had yet to learn what Caleb Mercer would demand in payment. As they drew closer, Eleanor noticed other details. The corrals held more than cattle. She counted at least a dozen horses, good stock by the look of them. A bunkhouse stood apart from the main house, smoke rising from its chimney. Men moved between the buildings, pausing to watch the wagon approach with expressions Eleanor couldn't read from this distance. "I run cattle mostly," Caleb said, as if reading her thoughts. "Some horses. Got 8 men who work for me year-round, more during roundup. They'll keep their distance from the house, but they'll be curious. Fair warning, most of them were loyal to Clara." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and a woman emerged onto the wide porch. She was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, and a face that suggested she'd never smiled in her life. Her appraisal of Eleanor and the children was thorough and cold. "Mrs. Foster," Caleb said, climbing down. "This is Eleanor, my wife, and her children." 9 of them. Mrs. Foster's tone made it sound like an accusation. "You didn't mention 9. Didn't figure it was your concern." Caleb reached up to help Eleanor down, his hands strong and impersonal. "She's the lady of the house now. You'll take your direction from her." Mrs. Foster's mouth thinned to a knife edge, but she nodded. "Supper's ready. I assume they'll be hungry. Hungry didn't begin to cover it. The children had eaten nothing but hard biscuits and jerky for 3 days, and before that meals had been sparse and irregular. Eleanor had grown accustomed to the hollow feeling in her own belly, the way her dresses hung loose where they'd once fit snug. But watching her children's faces as Mrs. Foster laid out the meal, roasted chicken, potatoes swimming in butter, fresh bread, greens from the garden, pie made with real sugar, she felt something crack open in her chest. "Go on," she whispered, "but mind your manners." They ate like wolves, trying and failing to remember the table graces she'd taught them. Eleanor forced herself to take small bites, aware of Mrs. Foster's disapproving stare, aware of Caleb watching from the head of the table with that same unreadable expression. Only when the younger children began to slow, their bellies finally full, did she allow herself to truly taste the food. It was good, better than good. It was the kind of meal she'd stopped letting herself imagine. "There's 4 bedrooms upstairs," Caleb said when the table had been cleared. "Main one's mine. You can take the one next to it, or Clara's room if you prefer." He paused. "Might be easier if the children doubled up. Plenty of space in the attic, too, once we get it sorted." "The room next to yours will be fine." Eleanor kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered. She'd known this moment would come, the question of sleeping arrangements, of marital expectations. "The children can share, they're used to it." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'll have Thomas help me bring up some extra mattresses. Mrs. Foster can find linens." He stood, scraping his chair back. "I've got evening chores. Make yourself at home, Eleanor. This is your house now." He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Through the window, Eleanor watched him cross the yard toward the barn, his shoulders set in that same rigid line. Mrs. Foster began clearing plates with sharp, angry movements. "He loved her, you know." The housekeeper's voice came low and bitter. "Clara worshipped the ground she walked on, built this whole place for her, every stone and timber. Then she died, and something in him died with her. Now here you come with your brood, thinking you can just step into her place." Eleanor met the older woman's eyes directly. "I'm not trying to step into anyone's place, Mrs. Foster. I'm trying to keep my children alive. If that offends you, I'm sorry, but I won't apologize for accepting an honest offer of marriage." "Honest?" Mrs. Foster laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You don't know the first thing about this place, about what really happened to Clara, about the men who want this land and won't stop until they get it." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "You should have stayed on that stagecoach." Before Eleanor could respond, Sarah appeared at her elbow, her small face worried. "Mama, I don't like that lady." "Hush." Eleanor smoothed her daughter's hair, but her own unease had deepened. "Go help your sisters get ready for bed. I'll be up soon." The house revealed itself slowly as Eleanor explored, checking on her children as they settled into rooms that must have seemed impossibly grand after months of boarding house floors. The furnishings spoke of money and taste, carved furniture, good rugs, curtains of real lace. Pictures on the walls showed landscapes and still lifes. Nothing personal. No photographs of Clara, Eleanor noticed. No trace of the woman who'd built this place except the ghost in Mrs. Foster's bitter words. She found Caleb in the barn, forking hay into stalls where horses nickered softly in the dimness. He'd lit a lantern against the gathering dark, and the light turned his face into sharp angles and shadows. "Your housekeeper thinks I'm making a mistake," Eleanor said quietly. Caleb's hands didn't pause in their work. "Mrs. Foster thinks everyone's making a mistake. She's been with me since Clara and I married, loyal as a hound, but twice as mean. She loved Clara. Everyone loved Clara." The words came flat, almost bitter. "She was beautiful and kind and everything a woman should be. Then she died, and I became the monster who killed her." Eleanor stepped closer, breathing in the smell of hay and leather and horse. "Did you?" Caleb's hands finally stilled. He turned to face her, his eyes dark in the lantern light. "No. I found her at the base of Eagle Cliff with her neck broken and her horse grazing 50 yards away. The sheriff ruled it an accident, spooked horse, bad fall, tragedy, pure and simple. But there were people who stood to gain if I was convicted of murder, people who wanted this land. He drove the pitchfork into the hay with sudden violence. They spread their poison, and it took root. Now half the town thinks I'm a killer, and the other half doesn't care one way or another. Who wanted the land? Does it matter? Caleb pulled the pitchfork free and hung it on the wall with careful precision. They didn't get it then, and they won't get it now. This ranch is the only thing I have left of Clara. I'll die before I let it go. Eleanor heard the truth in his words. Not love for her, not even kindness toward her children, but an obsession with holding on to what remained. She'd married a man still married to a ghost, bound to a patch of earth soaked in suspicion and old grief. I need to know what we're walking into, she said. What kind of danger my children face. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, the sound carrying years of exhaustion. There's a man named Marcus Holloway, owns the bank, half the businesses in Cedar Bend, and most of the politicians for 3 counties around. He's been buying up land in this valley for 10 years, piece by piece, pushing out anyone who won't sell. This ranch is the last one holding out. He paused. Claire's father sold him parcels on the edges, thinking he was being friendly. I stopped it when I realized what was happening. 2 weeks later, Clara was dead. You think this Holloway killed her? I think he's capable of it. I think he's gotten away with worse. Caleb's jaw tightened. But thinking and proving are different things. The sheriff's in Holloway's pocket, so is the judge. Anyone who speaks against him tends to leave town or have accidents. I've stayed alive by keeping my head down and my hands on my property. Then why take on a wife and 9 children? Eleanor's voice sharpened with sudden anger. If this place is so dangerous, why bring us here? Caleb met her eyes directly. Because I was tired of being alone. Because having people in the house again felt like maybe I could stop just surviving and start living. His voice dropped. And because Holloway's getting bolder. Last month, 3 of my fences got cut. Week before that, someone tried to poison my water. I needed something to fight for beyond just my own stubborn pride. The honesty struck Eleanor harder than any pretty lie could have. She recognized it. The desperate gamble of a person with no good choices left, only less terrible ones. It was what had brought her here, after all. What had made her step off that stagecoach into a stranger's life? I can't promise you safety, Caleb continued. I can't promise you much of anything except that I'll work myself to bone to keep this place running and keep food on the table. What I can promise is that I won't lie to you. You'll know what we're facing, and you can make your own choices. Choices? Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. I had choices when I left St. Louis. Stay and watch my children starve or come west and hope for something better. Now I'm here, married to a man surrounded by enemies, living in a house built by a woman everyone loved. She looked around the barn at the evidence of wealth that suddenly felt more like a target. What choice do I have now except to make this work? You could leave. Caleb's voice gentled slightly. I'd give you money for passage back east, enough to start over somewhere safe. Eleanor thought of Thomas's face when he'd seen the ranch, the way wonder had broken through his careful composure. She thought of Sarah sleeping in a real bed for the first time in months, her belly full. She thought of her other children, Grace and Matthew and little James and the twins and Anna, finally settling into something that felt like stability. No, she said quietly, we stay. But I need you to understand something, Mr. Mercer. I didn't come here to replace your Clara or to fall in love or to be anything except a mother to my children. If danger's coming, I'll face it. If your enemies want this place, they'll have to go through me to get it. But don't expect me to play the grieving widow or the grateful charity case. I'm your wife in name because that's the agreement we made. Nothing more. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. That suits me fine, Mrs. Mercer. I don't have room for anything more than survival right now anyway. They stood in the barn's dimness, 2 strangers bound by necessity and desperation, while outside the Montana night deepened and the first stars emerged over the mountains. Eleanor thought of Mrs. Foster's warning, of Marcus Holloway's shadow falling across this valley, of all the ways this fragile arrangement could shatter. But she also thought of her children sleeping soundly for the first time in months, and she knew she'd made the only choice she could live with. I should check on the children, she said finally. Make sure they're settled. Eleanor, Caleb's voice stopped her at the barn door. Thank you. for staying, for giving this a chance. She nodded without turning around, not trusting her voice, and walked back toward the house where lamplight glowed warm in the windows. Behind her, Caleb remained in the barn's shadows, a man haunted by ghosts and fighting battles he couldn't win alone. The house was quiet when Eleanor climbed the stairs, checking each room where her children slept. Thomas had claimed the smallest bedroom, insisting the younger ones needed more space. The twins were curled together like puppies in one bed while Anna and Grace shared another. Matthew and James had spread out in the attic room, already cluttering it with the few treasures they'd carried west. Sarah slept in Eleanor's room, her rag doll clutched tight, her breathing soft and even. Eleanor stood at the window, looking out over the ranch that was now somehow hers. The moon had risen, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. She could see the bunkhouse where Caleb's men lived, could make out the shapes of cattle in distant pastures, could trace the line of the creek as it wound through the valley. It was beautiful. Clara Mercer had built something beautiful here, something worth fighting for. And now that fight had fallen to Eleanor, whether she wanted it or not. A sound from downstairs made her tense. The front door opening, boots on the wooden floor. Eleanor moved silently to the top of the stairs, listening. Caleb's voice came low and urgent, speaking to someone she couldn't see. "Warned you not to come here," he was saying. "Had to." The second voice belonged to a younger man, breathless and worried. "Holloway's men were at the Johansson place today. Offered to buy them out, same as always. When they refused, barn burned down that night. Whole thing went up like kindling." Eleanor heard Caleb curse softly. "Anyone hurt?" "No, thank the Lord. But they're leaving, Caleb. Packing up and heading to Oregon. Said they can't afford to rebuild, and they're not waiting around for Holloway to come after the house next." A pause. "You're the only one left now. The only one still holding out. Then I guess I'm the only one with any spine left in this valley. Or the only one with a death wish." The young man's voice dropped. "I heard you got married today. Brought in a woman with children. Are you insane? Now's not the time to be taking on dependents. Now's exactly the time." Caleb's voice hardened. "Holloway wants me isolated, wants me vulnerable. Having a family here changes things, makes this more than just one stubborn man refusing to sell. It makes you a target with hostages." The words hit Eleanor like cold water. She pressed closer to the railing, straining to hear Caleb's response. "They're not hostages. They're people who needed help, and I needed—" He trailed off. "It doesn't matter. What's done is done. Tell the others to stay alert. If Holloway's escalating, we need to be ready." Eleanor heard the front door close, then Caleb's footsteps crossing to his study. The clink of glass on glass suggested he was pouring himself a drink. She stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her heart pounding, her mind racing. Hostages. The word echoed in her head. She'd brought her children into a war zone, married a man with enemies who burned barns and bought judges. And now there was no way out except through. Sarah stirred in sleep, murmuring something Eleanor couldn't make out. She returned to the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her daughter's peaceful face in the moonlight. Outside, the Montana night pressed close, full of shadows and secrets and dangers she was only beginning to understand. But Eleanor Price Mercer had survived worse. She'd buried a husband and lost a farm and crossed half a continent with 9 children and almost no money. She'd learned that survival required more than hope. It required steel in your spine and fire in your belly and the willingness to fight for every scrap of safety you could claim. If Marcus Holloway wanted this ranch, he'd find it defended. If the town wanted to whisper about Caleb Mercer, they'd have to whisper about her too. And if anyone threatened her children, anyone at all, they'd discover that a desperate mother was more dangerous than any ghost. Eleanor lay down beside Sarah, her daughter's warmth a small comfort against the gathering dark. Tomorrow, she'd learn more about this place, about the forces arrayed against them, about how to turn a marriage of convenience into a fortress against the storm. Tomorrow, she'd start building defenses. But tonight, she let herself feel the weight of her choice, the magnitude of the risk she'd taken. The heat had lied about many things, about Caleb Mercer's modest ranch, about the simple peace she'd hoped to find. But it had told one truth clearly. Summer in Montana was unforgiving, and only the strong survived its fire. Morning came too early, announced by roosters and the low voices of men gathering for work. Eleanor woke disoriented, reaching instinctively for children who weren't there before remembering. Sarah in the bed beside her, the others scattered through rooms that still felt like borrowed spaces. Through the window, dawn painted the mountains gold and rose, beautiful enough to make her chest ache. She dressed quickly in the same travel-worn dress she'd arrived in, then woke Sarah gently. "Come on, sweetheart. Time to see what kind of life we've landed in." Downstairs, Mrs. Foster already had breakfast laid out. Eggs and bacon, biscuits, coffee strong enough to strip paint. The housekeeper's expression suggested she'd hoped Eleanor might sleep through until noon, proving herself useless. Eleanor met her eyes steadily as she poured coffee. "The children will need to earn their keep," Eleanor said. "What needs doing?" Mrs. Foster's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Mercer didn't marry you to put you to work." "Mr. Mercer married me because he needed help, same as I needed shelter. Now tell me what needs doing, or I'll figure it out myself and likely step on your toes in the process." A ghost of something almost like approval flickered across the housekeeper's face. "Garden needs weeding. Chickens need feeding and eggs collected. Laundry's a 3-day job with this many people. Mending piles tall as my hip." She paused. "And someone needs to teach those children proper table manners before they embarrass themselves and everyone else." "I'll see to it." Eleanor heard footsteps on the stairs, her brood descending, drawn by the smell of food. "But first, breakfast. Then we'll sort out chores." Caleb appeared as the children were finishing their meal, his hat in his hands, dust already coating his boots. He looked like he hadn't slept, shadows dark under his eyes. "Thomas," he said, addressing Eleanor's oldest, "you ever work cattle?" The boy straightened, trying to look older than his 15 years. "Some, sir. Before my father died, we had a small herd. I know my way around a rope." "Good. I could use an extra hand today. We're moving stock to higher pasture." Caleb's gaze shifted to Eleanor. "If that's all right with you." Eleanor saw the hunger in Thomas's face, the desperate need to be useful, to be seen as a man. She also saw the careful way Caleb asked permission, acknowledging her authority over her children, even as he tested boundaries. "It's fine, but he takes breaks when he needs them, and he comes back in one piece." "Yes, ma'am." Caleb settled his hat. "We'll be back by sundown." Eleanor watched them go, her son walking beside his new stepfather with careful dignity, trying not to show his eagerness. The other children scattered to their assigned tasks. Grace and Anna to help Mrs. Foster with dishes, the twins to feed chickens, Matthew and James to haul water from the pump. Sarah stayed close to Eleanor, her small hand finding her mother's skirt. "Can I help you, Mama?" "Always, baby. Come on. Let's see what kind of garden Clara Mercer left behind." The garden sprawled behind the house, bigger than Eleanor had expected and surprisingly well-tended despite Mrs. Foster's complaints. Beans climbed poles in neat rows, tomatoes sprawled heavy with green fruit, carrots and potatoes promised abundance beneath the soil. Someone had cared for this place, had planned for a future of full cellars and preserved plenty. Eleanor knelt in the dirt, Sarah beside her, and began pulling weeds with methodical precision. The sun climbed higher, the heat building, and she fell into the rhythm of work that had sustained her through every crisis. Hands busy, mind clear, one task at a time until the impossible became merely difficult. "Mrs. Mercer?" A voice interrupted her concentration. Eleanor looked up to find a young man standing at the garden's edge, hat in hand, looking nervous. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. Name's Jack Hartley. I work for your husband." Eleanor stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. He was maybe 20, with sun-bleached hair and a face still soft with youth. The same voice she'd heard last night, warning Caleb about burned barns and Holloway's escalation. "Mr. Hartley, what can I do for you?" "It's more what I can do for you, ma'am." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Mercer asked me to show you around the property, help you get your bearings. He said you should know what you're dealing with." Eleanor glanced at Sarah, then back at the young ranch hand. "All right, Sarah, go find your sisters. Stay close to the house." "But Mama." "Go on now. I'll be back soon." Jack led her past the barn, past corrals where horses watched with liquid eyes, toward the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the property. As they walked, he pointed out landmarks. The bunkhouse where 8 men lived, the smokehouse, the root cellar dug deep into the hillside, the forge where the blacksmith worked. It's a good outfit, Jack said quietly. Mr. Mercer runs it fair, pays decent wages, feeds us well, doesn't ask more than a man can give. Most of us have been here since he and Miss Clara built the place. He paused. We loved her, ma'am. Everyone did. When she died, it nearly killed him too. I'm not trying to replace her, Eleanor said. I know. He told us that. Jack stopped at the creek's edge, where water ran clear over smooth stones. But I wanted you to understand what you're up against. This town loved Clara Mercer. They see you as an outsider, a woman who swooped in to take advantage of a grieving man. And Holloway, he hesitated. Holloway will use that against you both. Tell me about him, about what really happened. Jack looked at her searchingly, as if trying to gauge how much truth she could handle. Then he sighed. Marcus Holloway came to this valley about 15 years back with money from back east and ambitions bigger than the territory. Started buying land, building businesses, getting his fingers into every pocket that mattered. Most folks were happy to sell, good prices, no hassle, move on to somewhere easier. But there were a few who wouldn't budge, like Caleb. Like Caleb and Clara both. This land was her inheritance, you understand. Her father built the original homestead, and she grew up running these hills. When she married Mr. Mercer, they expanded it together. Built something real, something lasting. Jack picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek. Holloway tried to buy them out maybe 5 times. Each time they refused. Then Clara's father got sick, cancer, ate him up from the inside. In his last months, Holloway convinced him to sign over parcels on the edges of the property, said it was for Clara's own good, for her security. But it wasn't. It was about leverage. Holloway started running his own cattle on that land, right up against the property lines. Built a line shack that's really a watch post. Made it clear he could squeeze them anytime he wanted. Jack's jaw tightened. When Mr. Mercer put a stop to it, told Clara's father no more sales, things got ugly. Fences cut, cattle scattered, water sources fouled. Little things, hard to prove, but constant. Eleanor felt cold despite the climbing sun. And then Clara died. She went riding alone, something she'd done 1,000 times. Her horse came back without her. They found her at the base of Eagle Cliff, with her neck broken. Jack's voice dropped. The horse didn't have a scratch on it. No signs of panic, no foam on its mouth. Just walked home calm as Sunday morning. You don't think it was an accident? I think Clara Mercer was the best rider in the territory. I think that cliff trail is dangerous, sure, but she knew every inch of it. And I think it's mighty convenient that she died right when Holloway's pressure was getting intense. He met Eleanor's eyes. But thinking isn't proving, and the sheriff, who gets half his campaign money from Holloway, said accident and closed the case in 3 days. Eleanor absorbed this, pieces clicking into place. So Caleb's been alone here for 2 years, holding out against a man who controls the law and has already killed once to get what he wants. That's about the size of it, ma'am. Jack hesitated. Which is why some of us were worried when we heard he'd gotten married. Bringing you and those children here, it's like painting a target on your backs. He told me as much, gave me the choice to leave. But you stayed. I stayed. Eleanor looked back toward the house, where she could see Grace hanging laundry on the line, the white sheets snapping in the breeze. My children need a home, Mr. Hartley. They need food and safety, and a chance at something better than what I could give them alone. If that means facing down Marcus Holloway, then that's what I'll do. Jack studied her with new respect. You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Mercer. I've had to be. Eleanor turned back toward the house. Show me the boundaries. I want to know exactly where Holloway's land touches ours. They spent the next 2 hours walking fence lines, Jack pointing out landmarks and trouble spots. Eleanor memorized it all, the northern pasture where cattle sometimes disappeared, the eastern line where Holloway's watch post sat like a warning, the southern ridge where the property touched the main road to Cedar Bend. By the time they returned to the house, she had a clear picture of the battlefield. Mrs. Foster met them at the kitchen door, her face pinched with disapproval. Ryder came while you were off gallivanting. Message from town. She thrust a folded paper at Eleanor. From the banker. Mr. Holloway requests the pleasure of your company for tea tomorrow afternoon. Says he wants to welcome you properly to the territory. Eleanor unfolded the note, reading the careful script. The language was formal, polite, impossible to refuse without giving offense. "What do you think?" she asked Jack. "I think he wants to size you up. See what kind of woman Caleb brought home. Figure out if you're weak enough to pressure or strong enough to worry about." Jack's expression hardened. "And I think you shouldn't go alone." "I won't." Eleanor refolded the note. "Mrs. Foster, can you watch the children tomorrow afternoon? I have a social call to make." The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. "You're actually going?" "I am, and I'm going to smile and drink tea and let Mr. Holloway think whatever he wants to think." Eleanor's voice hardened. "Right before I make it clear that this family isn't going anywhere." That evening, when Caleb and Thomas returned dust-covered and exhausted, Eleanor told him about the invitation. They stood in the kitchen while Mrs. Foster served dinner, the children chattering at the table, everything domestic and normal except for the tension thrumming beneath. "You don't have to go," Caleb said quietly. "I know, I want to." Eleanor met his eyes. "Jack told me what happened to Clara, what Holloway's been doing. If I'm going to live here, raise my children here, I need to understand who we're dealing with. He'll try to intimidate you." "Let him try." Eleanor ladled stew into bowls, the simple action at odds with her words. "I've been intimidated by landlords and bill collectors and bank managers. I've been told I'm not good enough, not strong enough, not worth the space I occupy. One more powerful man looking down at me isn't going to break me." Caleb's expression shifted. Something almost like pride, quickly masked. "Take Jack with you, and don't drink or eat anything they offer. Holloway's too smart to poison you outright, but I don't trust him not to try something subtle." "Poison?" Eleanor's hand stilled on the ladle. "He tried it with my water supply last month. Killed 3 head of cattle before we figured it out." Caleb's voice remained level, but she heard the rage beneath. "The man fights dirty, Eleanor. You need to understand that. Then I'll fight dirty too." She finished serving dinner, called the children to the table, and sat down to eat as if they'd been discussing weather instead of murder. Thomas looked between them, clearly sensing the undercurrents. "Mama, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. How was your day with Mr. Mercer?" Her son's face lit up despite his exhaustion. "He let me rope a calf. Said I had good hands, good instincts. Said I could work with the men regular if I wanted. Earn real wages." Pride and hope warred in his expression. "Can I, Mama? Can I?" Eleanor saw what it meant to him. Not just the money, but the respect, the sense of purpose. She also saw the calculation behind Caleb's offer, the way he was binding her family to this place with opportunity and inclusion. "If Mr. Mercer thinks you're ready, and if your schoolwork doesn't suffer, then yes. You can." "There's a school in Cedar Bend," Caleb added, 3 miles down the road. Teacher's name is Miss Patterson. She's good, fair, doesn't care whose children she teaches." He looked at Eleanor. "We should get them enrolled, all of them. Education matters." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. She'd been prepared for many things: danger, hardship, a marriage of cold convenience. She hadn't been prepared for this quiet consideration, this understanding that her children needed more than just survival. "Thank you," she said softly. "That would be, thank you." After dinner, after the children had been herded to bed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Eleanor found Caleb on the front porch. He sat in a rocking chair carved from dark wood, smoking a pipe, staring out at the darkened valley. "Clara's chair," he said without looking at her. "She used to sit here every evening, watching the sunset. Said it was the most beautiful sight in the world." Eleanor settled into the chair beside his, the wood smooth and worn beneath her hands. "Tell me about her." "Why?" "Because she built this place. Because understanding her might help me understand what I'm fighting for." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, smoke curling from his pipe. Then he began to speak, his voice rough with memory. "Met her in Denver. I was working construction. She was visiting family. Pretty as a picture, smart as a whip, had this way of looking at you like she could see straight through to your bones." He smiled slightly. "She saw something in me worth saving, I guess. Convinced me to stop drinking away my wages and make something of myself. We married 6 months later. And came here. Her father's land. He was getting old, needed help working it. Clara had vision, though, saw what this valley could become. We expanded the herd, built the house, hired good men, created something that would last. His voice roughened. She wanted children. We tried for 5 years, but it never took. Damn near broke her heart every month when she realized she wasn't pregnant. I told her it didn't matter. We had each other. We had this place. But I think she felt like she'd failed somehow. Eleanor heard the pain beneath his words, the guilt. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. I know that now. Didn't help then. Caleb knocked ash from his pipe. The day she died, we'd argued. Stupid thing. I wanted to sell some of the outer parcels to Holloway, thought it might ease the pressure. She refused, said her father had made that mistake, and she wouldn't repeat it. We both said things we regretted. He paused. She rode out angry, came back dead, and I never got to tell her she was right. I'm sorry. Eleanor meant it. Whatever else lay between them, this grief was real and deep. Don't be. Clara wouldn't want pity. She'd want this place protected, want her legacy to mean something. Caleb looked at Eleanor directly. I meant what I said yesterday. I can't offer you love or romance or any of the pretty things women are supposed to want, but I can offer you partnership. We protect this place together, raise your children together, build something that lasts. That enough for you? Eleanor thought of all the marriages she'd known, her parents' quiet companionship, her own brief years with Jonathan, the desperate couplings she'd witnessed in boarding houses. Love was a luxury most people couldn't afford. Partnership, though, mutual survival. That was something she understood. It's enough, she said, more than I expected, honestly. Good. Caleb stood, stretching. I've got early rounds tomorrow. You need anything before you go into town, you let me know. Actually, there is one thing. Eleanor stood as well. Jack mentioned you pay wages to your men. What about the children? If Thomas is working, shouldn't he earn something of his own? Caleb considered this. Fair point. I'll pay him same as I'd pay any hand his age. $1 a day when he works. He can keep half. Other half goes to you for household expenses. Sound reasonable? More than reasonable. Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude that surprised her with its intensity. Thank you for treating him like the man. He's nearly grown. Might as well help him become the kind of man worth being. Caleb paused at the door. Eleanor? Tomorrow, when you meet Holloway. Don't let him see any fear. Men like him feed on it. I know. She'd met men like Marcus Holloway before, men who measured their worth by how much power they could take from others. I'll handle it. After he'd gone inside, Eleanor remained on the porch, rocking slowly in Clara Mercer's chair. The night was full of sounds, crickets singing, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the creek's constant murmur. Above, stars blazed in a sky unmarred by city lights, so many she couldn't begin to count them all. This place was beautiful, worth fighting for, worth the risk she was taking. But as Eleanor sat in a dead woman's chair preparing to face the man who might have killed her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stepped into a story already half-written. The question was whether she could change the ending before it claimed another victim. The next afternoon found Eleanor dressed in her best outfit, which wasn't saying much since her best was a patched navy dress that had seen 5 years of hard wear. But she'd washed and pressed it, pinned her hair into something approaching respectability, and borrowed a hat from Mrs. Foster that had belonged to Clara. The housekeeper had offered it with surprising gentleness, perhaps recognizing that Eleanor was going into battle and needed armor, however flimsy. Jack drove her to town in the wagon, his rifle resting across his knees in a way that suggested he knew how to use it. They didn't speak much during the ride, both lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the final hill and Cedar Bend came into view, Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. The bank sat at the center of town, a 2-story brick building that dwarfed everything around it. Imposing, permanent, the kind of structure meant to remind people of their place in the natural order of things. Jack helped Eleanor down from the wagon, his expression grim. I'll be right here. You need anything, you holler. I will. Eleanor straightened her shoulders and walked toward the bank's heavy wooden doors. Inside, the air felt cooler, almost cold despite the afternoon heat. A clerk directed her upstairs to an office overlooking Main Street. The doors stood open, and through it Eleanor could see a man standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, surveying his domain like a king surveying his kingdom. Mrs. Mercer. He turned, and Eleanor got her first look at Marcus Holloway. He was perhaps 50, handsome in a well-fed way, with silver threading his dark hair and expensive clothes that spoke of Eastern money. His smile showed good teeth. "How kind of you to accept my invitation." "Mr. Holloway," Eleanor kept her voice level, "you were kind to extend it. Please, sit. I've had my housekeeper prepare tea." He gestured to a table set with fine china, delicate sandwiches, cakes that probably cost more than Eleanor had spent on food in a month. She sat carefully, remembering Caleb's warning about eating or drinking anything. Holloway poured tea with practiced ease, playing the gracious host. "I must confess, I was surprised to hear Caleb had married, and with such a large family, 9 children, I'm told, that must be quite an adjustment for a man used to living alone." "We're managing." Eleanor accepted the teacup but didn't drink. "Mr. Mercer has been very generous." "Oh, I'm sure he has. Caleb's always been generous to a fault. It's one of his finer qualities." Holloway settled into the chair across from her, his eyes sharp despite his pleasant tone. "I knew his first wife, you know. Clara and I were quite close. Her father and I did considerable business together." "So I've heard." "A tragedy. What happened to her?" "Such a senseless accident." He sipped his tea, watching her over the rim. "But then, the ranch has always been a dangerous place. Isolated, difficult terrain, so many things that can go wrong. I worry about Caleb out there alone." "He's not alone anymore," Eleanor said quietly. "He has a family now." "Indeed, which brings me to why I asked you here." Holloway set down his cup. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm a businessman. I deal in facts and figures, assets and liabilities. And the fact is that ranch is a liability. It's costing Caleb more than it's worth, eating up resources, exposing him to constant risk. I've made him generous offers to purchase the property. He's refused everyone. That's his right. It is, but now he has responsibilities. 9 children to feed and clothe and educate. A wife who deserves security and comfort." Holloway leaned forward slightly. "I'm prepared to make an offer that would set your family up for life. Enough money to start fresh somewhere safer, somewhere those children could thrive without living in fear." Eleanor met his eyes directly. "We're not in fear, Mr. Holloway." "Not yet." His pleasant mask slipped slightly. "But you should be. That ranch is cursed. Clara knew it. That's why she came to me before she died, asking for help, begging me to convince Caleb to sell before something terrible happened." "I don't believe you." "Believe what you like. But ask yourself why a healthy woman in her prime suddenly dies in a riding accident. Ask yourself why Caleb's so desperate to hold on to that land that he'd marry a stranger and take on 9 children just to keep it." Holloway's voice hardened. "That ranch is all he has left of Clara. He's not protecting a home, Mrs. Mercer. He's protecting a grave." Eleanor felt anger rise hot and sharp. "Is that what you told yourself when you had her killed? That you were doing her a favor?" The room went very still. Holloway's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flash of cold rage, quickly suppressed. "That's a serious accusation, one you can't possibly prove." "I don't need to prove it. I just need to make sure it doesn't happen again." Eleanor stood, her untouched tea still sitting on the table. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Holloway, but my family isn't interested in selling, now or ever." "Everyone has a price, Mrs. Mercer." Holloway remained seated, relaxed, but his voice carried an edge that made Eleanor's skin prickle. "The question is whether you'll accept it before circumstances force you to." "Is that a threat?" "It's a prediction." He smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "I've been in this territory a long time. I've seen families come and go, fortunes rise and fall, people who thought they were special learn they're not. You seem like a practical woman, a mother who wants what's best for her children. I respect that. But practicality means knowing when you're outmatched." Eleanor walked to the door, then paused, looking back. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Holloway. I do want what's best for my children. That's why we're staying, because running from bullies never made anyone safer. It just teaches children that power wins and justice doesn't matter. She left before he could respond, walking down the stairs with her head high and her hands shaking. Jack was waiting by the wagon, his expression tight with worry. How'd it go? About as expected. Eleanor climbed into the wagon seat. Let's go home. They rode in silence until they had left town behind, the road climbing into the hills. Then Jack spoke quietly. You made an enemy today. I made an enemy the day I married Caleb Mercer. Eleanor watched the landscape roll past, beautiful and harsh. At least now I know exactly what I'm dealing with. When they reached the ranch, Caleb was waiting on the porch. One look at Eleanor's face told him everything he needed to know. That bad? He threatened my children. Eleanor's voice shook with barely controlled fury. Smiled and served tea and threatened my children while pretending to offer help. Caleb's jaw tightened. What did you say? I told him we're not selling, not now, not ever. She looked at her husband, her partner in this impossible fight. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Agreed? Agreed. Caleb held out his hand and Eleanor took it. Not a romantic gesture, but a promise. An alliance forged in necessity and tempered by shared enemies. Inside the house, Eleanor's children were setting the table for supper, laughing about something Thomas had said. They looked settled, happy, like they belonged here. Whatever it cost to keep them safe, Eleanor would pay it. Whatever darkness Marcus Holloway threatened, she would stand between it and her family. The heat still pressed down, relentless as always. But Eleanor had learned something important in Marcus Holloway's cold office. The summer sun didn't just burn away lies. It also hardened resolve, turned desperate hope into something stronger. She was done running, done bending, done letting powerful men dictate her fate. If Holloway wanted this ranch, he'd have to go through her first. And Eleanor Mercer had no intention of going easy. The trouble started 3 days later, just after dawn, when the air still held a hint of coolness before the sun could burn it away. Eleanor was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Foster prepare breakfast when she heard shouting from the barn. She dropped the bowl she'd been holding and ran, her skirts tangling around her legs, heart hammering against her ribs. Thomas stood in the barn doorway, his face white with shock. Behind him, Caleb knelt in the straw beside one of his best mares, the animal's sides heaving with labored breaths, foam flecking her muzzle. What happened? Eleanor demanded. Poison. Caleb's voice came flat and hard. Someone got to the water trough during the night. This is the third horse showing symptoms. He looked up at her, and Eleanor saw murder in his eyes. They're escalating. Jack appeared from one of the stalls, his expression grim. Found 2 more down in the far paddock. I've moved the rest away from the trough, but the damage is done. Eleanor watched the mare struggle, each breath a visible fight. Can we save them? Maybe, if we act fast. Caleb stood, his hands clenched. Jack, ride for Doc Henderson. Tell him what we're dealing with. Thomas, help me get these animals isolated. We need to flush their systems, force water and charcoal down their throats if we have to. I'll help, Eleanor said. No? Caleb's tone brooked no argument. Get the other children away from the barn. Keep them in the house. I don't know what we're dealing with, or if whoever did this is still watching. Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to stand her ground and prove her worth, but she saw the logic in his words and the fear beneath his anger. She gathered her children like a hen gathering chicks, herding them inside despite their protests and questions. Is someone trying to hurt us? Sarah asked, her small hand gripping Eleanor's skirt. Someone's trying to scare us, Eleanor corrected, kneeling to her daughter's level. But being scared and being hurt are different things. We're going to be smart and careful, and we're going to be fine. Through the window, she watched men moving between buildings, their movements urgent and coordinated. The sun climbed higher, turning the barnyard into a furnace of heat and tension. Mrs. Foster appeared at Eleanor's elbow, her usual disapproval replaced by something harder. This is what happens, the housekeeper said quietly. This is what loving this place costs. Then the price is too damn high. Eleanor's hands curled into fists. How long has Holloway been doing this? How many times has Caleb endured attacks like this without fighting back? Fighting back means escalation, means someone gets killed. Mrs. Foster's voice dropped. Miss Clara tried to fight. Look where it got her. Eleanor turned to face the older woman directly. Are you saying Caleb should just surrender? Let Holloway win? I'm saying maybe some battles aren't worth the cost. Mrs. Foster's expression softened slightly. You seem like a good woman, Mrs. Mercer. Those children deserve better than growing up in a war zone. You could convince him to sell, take the money, start fresh somewhere safe. It's not surrender. It's survival. No. Eleanor's voice came out harder than she intended. It's teaching my children that bullies win, that people with money and power get to take whatever they want while the rest of us just accept it. I won't do that. I can't. The housekeeper studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're more like Clara than I thought. She had that same stubborn fire, that same belief that right ought to win over might. She paused. I hope you're also smart enough to know when to bend before you break. Doc Henderson arrived an hour later, a grizzled man with steady hands and tired eyes. Eleanor watched from the porch as he examined the poisoned horses, conferring with Caleb in low tones. When he finally emerged from the barn, his expression told her everything she needed to know. Lost 2, he said, accepting the coffee Eleanor offered. The others might pull through, but it'll be touch and go for the next few days. Whatever they ingested was meant to kill, not just sicken. Can you tell what it was? Eleanor asked. Arsenic, most likely. Common enough, easy to obtain, deadly in the right dose. Henderson sipped his coffee, his gaze distant. This is the 3rd ranch this month to report poisoned livestock. All of them properties Holloway's been trying to buy. Eleanor felt ice settle in her stomach despite the climbing heat. Why hasn't anyone gone to the law? The law is Sheriff Briggs, and Briggs owes his position to Holloway's campaign contributions. Henderson's mouth twisted. I've treated enough mysterious ailments and convenient accidents to know when something's rotten. But knowing and proving are different things, especially when the man you're accusing signs the paychecks. Then what do? You survive. You document everything. You wait for Holloway to make a mistake big enough that even his money can't cover it. Henderson handed back his empty cup. And you pray that mistake doesn't cost someone their life. After the doctor left, Eleanor found Caleb in the barn, scrubbing his hands in a bucket of water. His shirt was soaked with sweat and worse things, his face haggard with exhaustion and rage. 2 horses dead, he said, without looking at her. Both bred from Clara's original stock, both worth more than most men make in a year. His hands stilled in the water. He's not just attacking my livelihood, Eleanor. He's attacking her memory, destroying everything she built, piece by piece. Eleanor moved closer, close enough to smell the sweat and fear and anger radiating from him. Then we need to stop reacting and start planning. We need to think like he thinks, anticipate his next move. You think I haven't tried? Caleb's voice rose, sharp with frustration. I've spent 2 years playing defense, shoring up weaknesses, trying to stay one step ahead. It's not enough. He's got resources I can't match, connections I can't break, patience I can't outlast. So we changed the game. Eleanor's mind raced, sorting through possibilities. Holloway expects you to either fight back with violence or eventually surrender. What if we do neither? What if we bring in outside help, people he can't buy or intimidate? Like who? The territorial government's in his pocket. The courts are a joke. There's no one. What about federal authorities? Eleanor interrupted. This is government land, isn't it? Part of the Montana Territory under federal jurisdiction. If we can prove Holloway's been committing crimes, murder, poisoning, fraud, couldn't we appeal directly to someone beyond his reach? Caleb stared at her, something shifting in his expression. The territorial marshal, based in Helena, answers directly to Washington. He's got authority over local sheriffs, can override their decisions if federal crimes are involved. Then we gather evidence. We document every attack, every threat, every suspicious death. We build a case so strong that even Holloway's money can't make it disappear. Eleanor's voice gained strength as the plan took shape. And we send someone to Helena to deliver it personally. Someone he won't expect, someone who can move fast and quiet. Thomas. Caleb said it like a revelation. He's young enough to seem harmless, old enough to handle the journey. Holloway's watching me, watching the ranch hands, but he won't be watching a 15-year-old boy. No. Eleanor's objection came swift and instinctive. He's too young, too inexperienced. The journey alone is dangerous. And if Holloway discovers what he's carrying, then you suggest someone better. Caleb's eyes bored into hers. Someone who knows the territory, who can ride hard, who Holloway won't suspect, because if we're going to do this, we need to do it now, before he strikes again. Eleanor thought of her son's face when he'd worked cattle, the pride and purpose she'd seen there. She thought of the kind of man she wanted him to become, brave, principled, willing to stand up for what was right even when it was dangerous. And she thought of the alternative, the slow, grinding defeat of watching Holloway destroy everything they were trying to build. "Give me a day," she said finally. "Let me talk to Thomas. Make sure he understands what he'd be riding into. If he agrees, if he's truly willing, then we'll do it. But this has to be his choice." "Fair enough." Caleb pulled his hands from the bucket, water dripping onto the barn floor. "But Eleanor, we don't have much time. Holloway's getting bolder. The next attack might not be against horses." That night, after the younger children had been put to bed and the house had settled into uneasy quiet, Eleanor sat with Thomas on the front porch. The stars blazed overhead, indifferent to human struggles, and somewhere in the darkness a coyote called to its pack. "I need to tell you something," she began. "About what's happening here. About the danger we're facing." Thomas listened as she explained it all. Holloway's systematic campaign, Clara's suspicious death, the poisoned horses, and the plan to appeal to federal authorities. She didn't soften it or make it sound less frightening than it was. Her son deserved the truth. When she finished, Thomas sat silent for a long moment, his young face grave in the starlight. "You want me to ride to Helena with evidence against Holloway? I want you to have the choice. This isn't a small thing, Thomas. It's dangerous, it's difficult, and if something goes wrong, if Holloway's men catch you, they won't." Her son's voice carried a certainty that made Eleanor's heart ache. "Mama, I know you see me as a child, but I'm not anymore. I watched Papa die. I watched you work yourself to bone trying to keep us fed. I carried water and chopped wood and did everything I could to help, but it was never enough." He looked at her directly. "This is enough. This is me being the man Papa wanted me to be. Let me do this." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "If I say yes, you follow every instruction Caleb gives you. You take no unnecessary risks. You ride hard but careful, and you come back to me in one piece. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." Thomas's voice wavered slightly, betraying the boy beneath the brave words. "I won't let you down." "You could never let me down, sweetheart." Eleanor pulled him into a fierce embrace. "You're the best thing your father and I ever made. Now, let's make sure you live long enough to become everything you're meant to be." The next morning, Caleb began preparing Thomas for the journey, while Eleanor and the ranch hands compiled evidence. They documented every attack they could remember, gathered testimonies from neighbors who'd been forced to sell, collected samples of the poisoned water and the bodies of the dead horses. Jack contributed pages of careful notes about fence-cutting incidents, cattle theft, and suspicious fires. Even Mrs. Foster grudgingly added her account of Clara's death, including details that had never made it into the official report. Eleanor organized it all into a leather satchel, wrapping the documents in oilcloth to protect them from weather. As she worked, Grace appeared at her elbow. "Mama, Thomas told me he's leaving, going on a dangerous journey." Her daughter's voice trembled. "Is it true?" Eleanor set down the papers and gathered Grace close. "It's true, but he's doing something important, something that could keep all of us safe." "What if he doesn't come back?" "He will." Eleanor made her voice firm, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Your brother is smart and capable and braver than he knows. He'll come back." But that night, lying awake in her bed with Sarah breathing softly beside her, Eleanor let herself feel the full weight of fear. She was sending her oldest child into danger, gambling his life on the hope that justice still existed somewhere beyond Holloway's reach. If she was wrong, if something happened to Thomas, she would never forgive herself. The day of Thomas's departure arrived too quickly. Caleb had chosen the fastest horse, a young gelding with endurance and spirit. He'd plotted a route that avoided main roads where possible, sticking to mountain passes and game trails that would make Thomas harder to track. The ride would take 4 days if everything went well, longer if he encountered trouble. Eleanor packed food and water, extra clothes, a bedroll, matches, a knife. Practical things that couldn't protect against bullets or bad weather or simply getting lost in the vast wilderness between here and Helena. She watched Thomas check the saddle, adjust the stirrups, trying to look confident and capable while his hands shook slightly. "Remember," Caleb said, his voice low and urgent, "you don't tell anyone where you're from or what you're carrying until you're standing in front of Marshal Wade himself. Don't trust sheriffs or deputies or anyone claiming to represent the law. Holloway's influence spreads far, and you won't know who's on his payroll." "I understand." Thomas secured the satchel to his saddle, making sure it wouldn't shift during hard riding. "And if you're followed, if you even suspect someone's tracking you, you dump the evidence and run. The papers aren't worth your life." "They are, though." Thomas looked at Caleb steadily. "They're worth all our lives. If I don't get through, Holloway wins. I can't let that happen." Eleanor stepped forward, cupping her son's face in her hands. "You listen to me, Thomas Robert Price. Nothing is worth more than you coming home safe. Not this ranch, not justice, not pride. If it comes down to a choice between the evidence and your life, you choose life. Do you hear me?" "I hear you, Mama." Thomas's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But I'm going to get through. I'm going to deliver these papers, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to win." She kissed his forehead, breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather, and the particular sweetness of her firstborn child. Then she let him go, stepping back so Caleb could make final adjustments to the tack. The other children had gathered to see Thomas off, their faces reflecting varying degrees of understanding about what was happening. The twins waved enthusiastically, treating it like an adventure. Matthew and James looked worried, but trying to hide it. Grace openly cried while Anna clutched her hand. Sarah pressed against Eleanor's side, silent and watchful. "You take care of Mama," Thomas told them, his voice cracking slightly. "And mind Mr. Mercer. I'll be back before you know it." Then he was mounted, reins gathered, the horse dancing with eagerness to run. Caleb handed him a pistol, which Thomas tucked into his belt with hands that had stopped shaking. 4 days there, 4 back, Caleb said. "If you're not home in 10 days, I'm coming after you." "I'll be home in 9. Thomas managed a shaky grin. Then he touched his heels to the horse's sides and was gone, racing across the valley toward the mountain pass that would carry him beyond Holloway's immediate reach. Eleanor watched until he disappeared from sight, swallowed by distance and the shimmering heat. Beside her, Caleb stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. "He'll make it," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "He has to." Eleanor's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Because I don't know how to survive if he doesn't." The days that followed crawled past with agonizing slowness. Eleanor threw herself into work, scrubbing floors until her hands bled, weeding the garden until her back screamed, anything to keep her mind occupied and her hands busy. The younger children sensed her distraction and grew quieter, more careful, as if afraid their mother might shatter if they pressed too hard. Caleb disappeared into ranch work, driving himself and his men harder than necessary. Eleanor watched him from the kitchen window, saw the rigid set of his shoulders, the way he kept scanning the horizon as if he could conjure Thomas home through sheer force of will. On the 3rd day, riders appeared on the eastern ridge. Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat until she recognized the horses. Not Thomas returning, but strangers. 3 men, heavily armed, moving with the casual confidence of people who expected no resistance. Caleb appeared from the barn, Jack and 2 other ranch hands flanking him. Eleanor gathered her children and pushed them toward the house, then grabbed the rifle Caleb kept by the door. Mrs. Foster materialized at her side, her own shotgun in hand. "You know how to use that?" the housekeeper asked. "I'm about to learn." Eleanor positioned herself at the window where she could see the approaching riders while staying mostly hidden. The strangers stopped in the yard, making no move to dismount. The leader was a thick-bodied man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Mercer," he called. "Got a message from Mr. Holloway. He's heard you might be planning something foolish. Thought he'd offer one more chance to reconsider his generous offer before circumstances get unpleasant." "You can tell Holloway his offer's still refused," Caleb replied, his voice carrying clearly. and you can get off my land before I have you removed." The scarred man smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "That's the thing about land ownership. It's only yours as long as you can hold it. And we've been wondering how well you can hold it with all these new dependents. Children are fragile things. Accidents happen." Eleanor's hands tightened on the rifle. Through the window, she saw Caleb's stance shift, saw Jack's hand drop to his gun. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, violence hanging thick in the afternoon heat. "You threatening my family?" Caleb's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. "Just making observations, like how I observed a young man riding hard toward Helena a few days back, carrying something awful important looking in his saddlebags." The scarred man's smile widened. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Eleanor felt the world tilt sideways. They knew. Somehow, impossibly, they knew about Thomas. Caleb didn't react, his expression carved from stone. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Course not. Just like you don't know that Helena's a long ride for a boy alone. Lots of places where a person could get lost, run into trouble, never make it to their destination." The man gathered his reins. "Mr. Holloway wanted me to mention that, in case you were worried about anyone who might be traveling in that direction." The riders turned and left at a leisurely pace, their message delivered. Eleanor watched them go, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. When they disappeared over the ridge, she set down the rifle with trembling hands and walked outside. Caleb stood frozen in the yard, his face ashen. "They know. They're going after him." "We don't know that," Eleanor said, but her voice shook. "Thomas is smart. He's careful. He'll avoid the main roads, stay out of sight. He's 15 years old, riding alone through hostile territory, carrying evidence that could destroy a powerful man." Caleb's voice cracked. "I sent him to his death, Eleanor. I put your son in danger because I was too stubborn to let go of this cursed piece of land." Eleanor grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "You gave him a chance to fight back, to do something that matters. That's not the same as killing him." She took a shaky breath. "And we don't give up on him. Not yet. Not ever." "What do you want me to do? Ride after him? I don't know which route he took, where he might be. I'd be searching blind, and every hour I waste is another hour Holloway's men have to find him first." "Then we do what Thomas is doing. We keep fighting." Eleanor's voice hardened with desperate determination. "We fortify this place. We prepare for whatever Holloway sends next. And we trust that our son is strong enough and smart enough to outrun whatever's chasing him." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She paced her room, then the hallway, finally ending up on the front porch where Clara's rocking chair waited. She sank into it, letting the familiar creak and sway calm her slightly. Caleb found her there sometime after midnight, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one without speaking, then settled into the chair beside hers. "I keep thinking about Clara," he said finally, "about how she died alone, how I wasn't there to protect her, how I failed her." He paused. "And now I've done the same thing to your son, put him in danger, sent him away when he should have been safe." "Thomas chose this," Eleanor reminded him, "just like Clara chose to fight Holloway instead of surrender. You can't protect people from their own courage, Caleb. All you can do is make sure their courage means something. And if he dies, if Holloway's men catch him?" Eleanor felt tears finally spill over, hot against her cheeks. "Then we make sure his sacrifice isn't wasted. We keep fighting until every crime Holloway's committed comes to light. We burn this valley down if we have to, but we make sure justice finds him." They sat in silence, 2 parents bound by fear and hope, and the terrible weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. Above them, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns, indifferent to human suffering. In the bunkhouse, men slept fitfully, aware that war was coming whether they wanted it or not. And somewhere in the darkness between Cedar Bend and Helena, a 15-year-old boy rode through mountain passes and river valleys, carrying the hopes of everyone who'd ever been crushed beneath Marcus Holloway's ambitions. Thomas had 4 days of hard riding ahead, 4 days where anything could happen. 4 days where Eleanor could do nothing but wait and pray. And try to keep breathing despite the constant terror squeezing her lungs. The heat pressed down relentlessly, turning each day into an endurance test. Eleanor worked until exhaustion claimed her, then lay awake counting hours, calculating distances, imagining every terrible possibility. Grace asked repeatedly when Thomas would return, her worry a mirror of Eleanor's own. The twins sensed the tension and grew fractious, fighting over nothing. Even steady Anna seemed rattled, jumping at sudden noises. On the 5th day, Eleanor was hanging laundry when she saw dust rising on the eastern road. Her heart stuttered. Too soon for Thomas to return, which meant either Holloway's men coming back or news she didn't want to hear. She dropped the wet sheet and ran for the house, shouting for Caleb. But as the rider drew closer, Eleanor recognized the horse. The young gelding Thomas had ridden away on, now lathered with sweat and riderless, stirrups flapping against empty saddle leather. The animal limped into the yard and stopped, head hanging low, sides heaving. Blood streaked its shoulder. Not much, but enough to tell a story of violence. Caleb caught the reins, his face white with shock. The saddlebags hung open and empty. No Thomas. No evidence. No hope. Eleanor's legs gave out, and she collapsed in the dust, a sound tearing from her throat that was half scream, half prayer. Around her, the world continued turning, indifferent and cruel. The summer sun blazed down without mercy, and in the distance, thunder rumbled like a promise of storms that wouldn't break. Eleanor didn't remember Caleb lifting her from the dust, didn't remember being carried inside or placed on the sofa while Mrs. Foster pressed water to her lips. She came back to herself slowly, awareness returning in fragments, Grace's tear-stained face hovering above her, the twins clinging to each other in the corner, Sarah's small hand gripping hers with desperate strength. "Mama?" Grace's voice broke. "Mama, please, you're scaring us." Eleanor forced herself to sit up, forced air into lungs that felt crushed beneath an impossible weight. "I'm all right. I'm all right." The lie tasted like ashes, but her children needed it, so she gave it to them. Caleb stood at the window, his back rigid, staring out at the yard where Jack was examining the returned horse. When he spoke, his voice came hollow and dead. "There's no body. That means something. It has to mean something. It means they took him." Eleanor's voice shattered on the words. "It means Holloway's men caught him, and now—" "No!" Caleb spun to face her, his expression fierce. "No, we don't know that. The horse could have spooked, thrown him. Thomas could be injured somewhere, trying to make his way back on foot. We don't assume the worst until we have proof." Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to hope the way she was clinging to Sarah. But she'd seen too much of the world's cruelty to trust in miracles. Still, for her children's sake, she nodded. "You're right. We need to search. Backtrack the horse's trail. Look for signs of what happened. I'm leaving now, taking Jack and 2 others. Caleb grabbed his hat, checked his pistol. "Mrs. Foster will stay with you and the children. You keep everyone inside, keep the doors locked, and if anyone besides us comes back, you shoot first and ask questions later." Eleanor stood on shaking legs, crossed to him. "Bring my son home, Caleb. I don't care what condition he's in. I don't care what it costs. You bring him home." "I will." He gripped her shoulders briefly, the closest thing to an embrace they'd ever shared. "I swear to you, Eleanor, I will." Then he was gone, thundering out of the yard with his men, leaving Eleanor alone with her terrified children and a fear so vast it threatened to swallow her whole. She gathered the younger ones close, felt their small bodies trembling against hers, and forced herself to be the rock they needed even as she crumbled inside. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "Your brother is strong and smart. Whatever happened, he's fighting to come back to us. So we're going to be strong too. We're going to keep this house safe, keep ourselves ready, and when he walks through that door, we're going to be here waiting." Grace pulled away slightly, her young face aged by sudden understanding. "And if he doesn't come back?" Eleanor met her daughter's eyes directly. "Then we remember that he was brave, that he fought for something that mattered, and we make sure his courage meant something." The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Eleanor kept the children occupied with chores and lessons, anything to stop them from staring out windows and imagining horrors. Mrs. Foster moved through the house like a ghost, her usual sharp tongue silenced by shared grief. The sun climbed to its zenith and began its slow descent, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson that felt obscene in their beauty. As evening approached, Eleanor heard hoofbeats. She grabbed the rifle and positioned herself at the window, her heart hammering, praying it was Caleb returning with Thomas, safe and whole. But the riders that emerged from the growing shadows numbered only 3, Caleb, Jack, and one other ranch hand. No Thomas. Eleanor set down the rifle before she could drop it, then walked outside on legs that barely held her. Caleb dismounted heavily, his face haggard with exhaustion and something worse. Defeat. "We found where it happened," he said quietly. "About 15 miles northeast, in the narrow pass through Miller's Canyon. Signs of a struggle, blood on the rocks. Tracks showing at least 4 horses, maybe 5. He paused, his jaw working. The saddlebags were there, torn open, all the documents gone. And this." He held out something small and dark. Eleanor took it with trembling hands, then felt her knees buckle as she recognized Thomas's knife, the one she'd packed for him, the one that had belonged to his father. The blade was clean, but the handle was sticky with dried blood. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. There's more." Caleb's voice cracked. "We followed the tracks as far as we could before losing light. They split up, 3 riders heading back toward Cedar Bend, 2 heading north into the high country." He took a breath. "Eleanor, I think he's alive. I think they took him. Why?" The word came out raw and desperate. "Why take him if they already got what they wanted?" "Leverage, insurance. Maybe they plan to use him as proof of what happens to people who cross Holloway." Jack's voice came from behind Caleb, tight with anger. "Or maybe they took him because a 15-year-old boy is easier to break than a grown man, and they want to know exactly what evidence we compiled and who else might know about it." Eleanor felt something shift inside her, grief crystallizing into rage so pure and cold it burned away everything else. "Then we get him back, tonight, now. We ride to Holloway's ranch and we demand—" "No." Caleb cut her off. "That's what he wants. He wants us emotional and reckless, charging in without thinking. That's how people get killed." "My son is already taken." Eleanor's voice rose to a scream. "What else can they do to us?" "They can kill the rest of your children." Caleb grabbed her arms, forcing her to look at him. "They can burn this house with everyone in it. They can make Thomas watch while they destroy everything before they kill him, too. Is that what you want?" Eleanor sagged against him, her rage collapsing back into grief. "I want my son. I want him safe. I want—" Her voice broke. "I can't lose him, Caleb. He's all I have left of Jonathan. If Thomas dies, if he's gone, I don't know how to keep breathing." "Then we need to be smart." Caleb's voice gentled slightly. "We need to think like Holloway thinks. He took Thomas for a reason. He's keeping him alive for a reason. That gives us time to plan, to find where they're holding him, to mount a rescue instead of a suicide mission." Eleanor pulled back, swiping at her eyes. "How? We don't know where they went. We don't have resources to match Holloway's. We can't even trust the law to help us." "No, but we can send someone else to Helena." Caleb turned to Jack. "You know the route Thomas was taking. You know how to avoid Holloway's men. Can you make it?" Jack's expression hardened with determination. "I can make it. And I can get Marshal Wade back here before Holloway knows what's happening. It's still 4 days there, 4 back minimum. That's 8 days Thomas has to survive in Holloway's hands." Eleanor's voice shook. "What if we don't have that long?" "Then we buy time." Caleb released her, his mind visibly racing. "Holloway thinks he's won. He's got our evidence. He's got Thomas. He's got us cornered. We let him believe that. We approach him like we're ready to negotiate, ready to surrender. We ask for proof Thomas is alive, for terms of release. We drag it out, keep him talking, keep Thomas valuable as a hostage instead of a liability. And if he calls our bluff? He won't, not immediately. Holloway's careful, methodical. He'll want to savor his victory, make sure we're completely broken before he makes his final move." Caleb's expression turned grim. "We've got maybe 3 days before he gets impatient. That's 3 days for Jack to reach Helena, for the marshal to start moving, for us to gather whatever allies we have left." Eleanor looked at the darkening sky, at the stars beginning to emerge. Somewhere under that same sky, her son was imprisoned, possibly injured, certainly terrified. Every instinct screamed at her to act, to ride out into the night searching until she found him. But Caleb was right. Emotion without strategy would only get more people killed. "All right," she said finally. "We do it your way. Jack leaves for Helena tonight. We approach Holloway tomorrow, play the defeated victims, buy whatever time we can." She met Caleb's eyes. "But if Thomas dies while we're playing games, if Holloway hurts him because we were too cautious, I will never forgive you, or myself." "Understood," Caleb turned to Jack. "Take the fastest horse, take extra ammunition, and don't stop for anything. If you run into trouble, you dump everything and run. Getting to the marshal is the priority." Jack nodded, already moving toward the barn. "I'll leave within the hour, and Mr. Mercer, I'll bring help back. I swear it." After Jack departed, galloping into the darkness with all their hopes riding on his shoulders, Eleanor gathered her children and tried to explain what was happening. The younger ones struggled to understand, their questions simple and heartbreaking. Where was Thomas? When would he come home? Was he scared? "Yes," Eleanor told them, choosing honesty over comfort. "He's probably very scared, but he's also brave, and he knows we're doing everything we can to bring him home. So we need to be brave too. Can you do that?" They nodded, small faces solemn, and Eleanor felt her heart crack further. They were too young for this, too innocent to be thrust into a world where children could be stolen and used as weapons. But childhood had ended for all of them the moment that horse returned empty. That night, Eleanor didn't even try to sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at Thomas's knife where she'd placed it beside her father's old Bible. The bloodstains seemed to mock her, evidence of violence she'd been powerless to prevent. Caleb found her there near dawn, his own face gray with exhaustion. "You should rest." "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see him hurt and alone, and wondering why we haven't come for him." Eleanor's voice came out flat and dead. "How am I supposed to rest knowing that?" "You're supposed to stay strong for the other children. They need you functional, not falling apart." Caleb poured fresh coffee, slid a cup toward her. "And Thomas needs you sharp when we face Holloway. We can't afford mistakes." "I know." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I just keep thinking about all the things I should have said to him before he left. All the ways I should have prepared him better, protected him more." "He knew you loved him. That's what matters." Caleb sat across from her, the table a barrier between them. "I've been thinking about Clara, about the last conversation we had before she died. We fought about the ranch, about whether to sell. She said I was too stubborn, that pride would destroy us both. I told her she was too soft, that surrender was worse than death." His voice roughened. "Those were the last words we spoke to each other. Angry, bitter words that I'd give anything to take back." Eleanor heard the pain beneath his confession, the guilt that had been eating at him for 2 years. "She knew you loved her too. People say things in anger, but love runs deeper than that." "Does it?" Caleb met her eyes. "Because I'm sitting here wondering if my stubbornness, my refusal to let go of this cursed land, is what got Clara killed and Thomas taken. Maybe surrender isn't weakness. Maybe it's the smart choice, the kind choice, the only way to save what really matters." "No." Eleanor's voice came out harder than she intended. "Holloway doesn't get to win. He doesn't get to kill and steal and terrorize people into submission. If we surrender now, Clara's death meant nothing. Thomas's courage meant nothing. Every person Holloway has crushed becomes just another casualty in his march toward absolute power. Even if standing firm costs us everything? Especially then." Eleanor stood, her exhaustion burned away by renewed conviction. "Because our children are watching, Caleb. Grace and Anna and all the rest are learning what kind of people we are, what we stand for. I won't teach them that bullies win. I won't show them that fear is stronger than justice." Caleb studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You're a hell of a lot tougher than you look, Eleanor Mercer." "I've had to be, and I'm about to get tougher." She checked the time, nearly 6 in the morning. "When do we go to Holloway?" "Soon as it's full light. We show up at his ranch, ask to negotiate Thomas's release. We play the desperate parents willing to do anything." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And we buy Jack enough time to reach Helena and bring back the law." They rode out 2 hours later, just the two of them on horseback with the morning sun already promising brutal heat. Eleanor had dressed carefully in her best clothes, wanting to project dignity rather than defeat. Caleb had coached her on what to say, how to act, But as they approached Holloway's property, she felt her careful composure wavering. The ranch was massive, ostentatious in a way that spoke of wealth accumulated through means both legal and otherwise. The main house sprawled like a manor, with manicured gardens and marble steps and windows that reflected the sun like hostile eyes. Armed men watched from various positions, their presence a not-so-subtle reminder of Holloway's power. A butler answered their knock, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, what an unexpected pleasure." "We need to see Holloway," Caleb said flatly. "Tell him we're here to discuss terms." They were shown into a drawing room that dripped with expensive furnishings and Eastern elegance, everything designed to make visitors feel small and poor and outclassed. Holloway kept them waiting 20 minutes, a calculated insult, Eleanor realized, meant to reinforce who held power here. When he finally appeared, he looked fresh and rested, perfectly groomed, completely at ease. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, I must say I'm surprised to see you. I'd heard you were indisposed." "You have my son." Eleanor's voice came out cold and controlled. "I want him back." "Your son?" Holloway's eyebrows rose in theatrical surprise. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games." Caleb's hand moved toward his pistol before stopping. "We know you took him. We know you have the evidence he was carrying. Now we want to negotiate his release." "Negotiate." Holloway savored the word. "That's interesting. Tell me, what exactly do you have to negotiate with? You're alone, isolated, with no proof of any alleged crimes. Your boy disappeared. Tragic, certainly, but hardly my responsibility. For all I know, he simply ran off. Young men do that sometimes, especially when they're carrying burdens too heavy for their shoulders." Eleanor felt rage surge hot and fierce, but forced it down. "Name your price. You want the ranch? Fine. You want us gone? We'll leave. Just give me my son alive and unharmed." Holloway studied her with cold amusement. "You think this is about the ranch? About some petty land dispute?" He laughed. "Mrs. Mercer, this is about principle. About teaching people what happens when they challenge the natural order of things. Your husband defied me. He refused perfectly reasonable offers, spread lies about my character, tried to undermine my legitimate business interests. That required a response. So you killed his wife." The words burst out before Eleanor could stop them. "I did no such thing. Clara Mercer died in a tragic riding accident. The sheriff investigated thoroughly." Holloway's smile never wavered. "Of course, if your son were to meet with a similar accident while trespassing on dangerous territory, well, that would be equally tragic and equally beyond my control." "You bastard!" Caleb lunged forward, but two of Holloway's men materialized from the shadows, guns drawn. Eleanor grabbed her husband's arm, holding him back. "Please," she said, hating the weakness in her voice but knowing it was necessary. "Please, he's just a boy. Whatever anger you have toward us, whatever punishment you think we deserve, don't take it out on an innocent child." Holloway's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained calculating. "I'm not a monster, Mrs. Mercer. I don't harm children. If your son is alive, and I'm not confirming he is, then he's safe enough, for now. But his continued safety depends on your cooperation." "What do you want?" "The ranch, obviously. Full title transferred to me, no conditions, no legal challenges. You and your family leave the territory within 48 hours, and you sign a statement saying you fabricated all accusations against me, that you attempted to extort money through false claims." Holloway leaned back in his chair. "Do that, and your son will be released unharmed. You have my word." "Your word means nothing," Caleb spat. "Perhaps, but it's the only currency you have to trade in." Holloway gestured dismissively. "I'll give you 24 hours to consider my offer. Return tomorrow with your decision. If you agree, I'll arrange for the documents to be signed and your son to be returned. If you refuse," he shrugged. "Well, I'd hate for young Thomas to suffer for his parents' stubbornness." Eleanor felt sick, trapped in a nightmare where every choice led to disaster. "How do we know he's even alive? You could have killed him already and be playing us for fools." Holloway considered this, then nodded to one of his men. The guard left and returned minutes later carrying something that made Eleanor's breath stop. Thomas's shirt, torn and blood-stained, with a fresh blood stain that couldn't be more than hours old. "He's alive," Holloway said, "but as you can see, his situation is precarious. I'd hate for it to deteriorate further due to your intransigence." Caleb pulled Eleanor toward the door before she could do something foolish like attack Holloway with her bare hands. They rode back to their ranch in silence, both too angry and scared to speak. Only when they were safely behind their own doors did Eleanor allow herself to collapse. "He's hurting Thomas, bleeding him, terrorizing him, and we just sat there and took it." Her voice shook with fury and helplessness. "We should have killed him, should have shot him where he sat and damned the consequences. And Thomas would have died before we made it out of that house." Caleb paced like a caged animal. "Holloway's too smart to keep Thomas on his own property. He's stashed somewhere remote, somewhere we'd never find without help. Even if we killed Holloway, we'd lose any chance of getting Thomas back." "Then what do? We can't surrender the ranch, can't trust Holloway to keep his word, but we can't let him keep hurting my son." "We stall. We tell him we need more time to consider, that we need to see Thomas in person before signing anything. We drag it out another day, maybe two, buying Jack time to reach the marshal." Caleb stopped pacing, his expression grim. "And we pray that help arrives before Holloway's patience runs out." That night, Eleanor held Sarah close and told her other children stories about their brother. Funny memories, proud moments, all the ways Thomas had been brave and kind and good. Grace cried openly, the twins asked when he was coming home, and Eleanor lied with a smile, promising it would be soon. But alone in her room after the children finally slept, Eleanor allowed herself to feel the full weight of terror. Thomas was out there somewhere, hurt and alone, enduring torment she couldn't imagine, and she was powerless to help him, reduced to playing games with a monster while praying for rescue that might never come. She picked up his knife again, the dried blood dark against the blade. "Hold on, sweetheart," she whispered into the darkness. "Just hold on a little longer. We're coming for you. I swear we're coming." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The drought that had gripped the valley for weeks finally breaking, as if the sky itself was weeping for all the innocent blood that had been spilled on this cursed land. The next morning dawned gray and wet, the rain falling in steady sheets that turned the yard to mud. Eleanor woke to find Mrs. Foster in the kitchen, her face drawn. "Mr. Mercer's gone," the housekeeper said quietly. "Left before dawn. He said to tell you he's scouting the territory, looking for where they might be holding Thomas." Eleanor felt her heart sink. "He went alone?" "Took 2 men with him, said they'd be back by evening." Mrs. Foster hesitated. "He also said if Holloway's men come, you're to tell them he's considering the offer. Buy more time." "Time we might not have." Eleanor moved to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked valley. Every hour Thomas spends in Holloway's hands is another hour he's suffering. How much are we supposed to endure before we break? Until help comes. Or until there's nothing left to break. Mrs. Foster's voice held a bitter understanding. "That's what this land does, Mrs. Mercer. It grinds people down until they're either hard enough to survive or broken enough to leave." "Then I'll be hard enough." Eleanor turned from the window. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes. I'll be hard enough." The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Eleanor kept the children occupied, maintained routines, pretended normalcy while her mind raced through scenarios each more terrible than the last. When riders approached in the afternoon, her heart leaped. But it was only ranch hands returning from fence repair, not Caleb with news. Evening fell with no word. Eleanor fed the children, put them to bed, then settled into Clara's rocking chair on the porch despite the rain. The rhythmic drumming on the roof matched her heartbeat, and somewhere in that sound she found a strange peace. Whatever came, she would face it. Whatever price had to be paid, she would pay it. Because she was a mother, and mothers didn't surrender. They endured. They fought. They survived. And if surviving meant becoming as ruthless as the men who threatened her family, then that's what Eleanor would do. The heat had broken with the rain, but the fire in her heart burned hotter than ever. Caleb returned near midnight, soaked to the bone and empty-handed. Eleanor met him at the door, reading the defeat in his posture before he spoke a word. "Nothing," he said, stripping off his wet coat. We searched every abandoned line shack, every cave, every structure within 20 miles. Thomas isn't being held anywhere we can find. He slumped into a chair, exhaustion etched deep in his face. Holloway's got him somewhere remote, probably with guards. We'd need an army to mount a proper search. Then we go back to Holloway tomorrow and demand proof of life. Eleanor's voice came out harder than steel. We don't sign anything, don't agree to anything until we see Thomas with our own eyes. That could provoke him, make him angry enough to... Caleb couldn't finish the sentence. He's already hurting my son. He's already proven he's willing to kill to get what he wants. Anger can't make him worse than he already is. Eleanor sat across from him, her hands clenched in her lap. But it might make him careless, might make him reveal something useful. Before Caleb could respond, hoofbeats sounded in the yard, multiple riders approaching fast despite the rain and darkness. Eleanor grabbed the rifle while Caleb positioned himself at the window, pistol drawn. But the voice that called out made them both freeze. Mr. Mercer, it's Jack. I've brought the marshal. Eleanor threw open the door to find 6 riders dismounting in the muddy yard, Jack looking half dead from exhaustion, and beside him a tall man in his 50s wearing a federal marshal's badge and an expression of grim determination. Marshal Wade, the man introduced himself, striding onto the porch. Your ranch hand here made quite a persuasive case about crimes being committed in this territory. I've brought deputies and enough authority to override any local interference. His sharp eyes took in Eleanor and Caleb's haggard faces. Now tell me everything, and don't leave out details. They talked for 2 hours, laying out the full scope of Holloway's crimes. Clara's suspicious death, the systematic intimidation, the poisoned livestock, the stolen evidence, and Thomas's kidnapping. Marshal Wade listened with increasing anger, asking pointed questions, taking notes in a leather-bound book. This Holloway sounds like a piece of work, Wade said finally. But here's the problem. We don't have hard evidence. The documents your boy was carrying are gone. Without them, it's your word against Holloway's, and he's got the local authorities in his pocket. What about Thomas? Eleanor's voice cracked. My son is being held prisoner. That's kidnapping, a federal crime. If we can prove it, but Holloway will deny everything, claim the boy ran off or met with an accident. Without witnesses or physical evidence linking him to the crime, my hands are tied. Wade's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mercer, I believe you, but belief isn't enough for an arrest. Then what do we do? Caleb demanded. Let Holloway get away with it? Let him keep terrorizing people? We get creative. Wade leaned forward. Here's what I'm thinking. You go to Holloway tomorrow like you planned. Tell him you're ready to negotiate. But you wear a wire, a recording device hidden under your clothes. You get him talking, get him to admit to Thomas's kidnapping, maybe even to Clara's murder if he's feeling confident. That gives me the evidence I need for an arrest. Eleanor felt hope flare for the first time in days. And Thomas? How do we get him back? We follow whoever Holloway sends to guard you during the negotiation. They'll lead us right to where the boy is being held. Wade's smile was cold and predatory. Then we move in fast and hard, federal authority trumping whatever local resistance we encounter. It's dangerous, Caleb said slowly. If Holloway suspects anything, if he realizes we're recording him, then we improvise. But it's the best shot we've got. Wade stood, stretching his travel-worn muscles. Get some rest. Tomorrow we put this bastard away for good. Eleanor couldn't rest, but she tried for the children's sake, lying beside Sarah and listening to her daughter's soft breathing. Somewhere under this same rain-dark sky, Thomas was waiting for rescue. He'd been gone 6 days now, 6 days of suffering she couldn't imagine. But help was finally here, and tomorrow they would end this. She must have dozed because she woke to Sarah shaking her shoulder, morning light filtering gray through the windows. Mama, there's strange men outside. Are they going to help find Thomas? Yes, baby, they're going to help. Eleanor dressed quickly, her hands steadier than they'd been in days. Purpose had replaced despair, and she clung to it like a lifeline. Marshal Wade met her in the kitchen, holding a small device no bigger than a pocket watch. This attaches under your dress, against your ribs. It'll record everything said within 10 feet. All you have to do is get Holloway talking, keep him confident, make him believe he's won. I can do that. Eleanor took the device, feeling its weight, Such a small thing to carry so much hope. Caleb appeared, freshly shaved and wearing his best clothes. We should take a wagon instead of horses. Makes us look more like defeated people coming to surrender rather than fighters. Good thinking. Wade turned to his deputies. You follow at a distance, stay out of sight. When they make a move toward wherever they're holding the boy, you track them. I'll stay close to Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, ready to intervene if things go sideways. The ride to Holloway's ranch felt surreal, the morning sun breaking through clouds to paint everything in shades of gold and green. The rain had washed the valley clean, and for a moment Eleanor could see why Clara had loved this land enough to die for it. Beautiful and harsh, demanding and rewarding in equal measure. Holloway received them in the same drawing room, but this time his demeanor was different, relaxed, almost jovial, the attitude of a man who believed victory was assured. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, I trust you've had time to consider my offer? We have. Caleb's voice carried just the right note of defeat. We're prepared to sign over the ranch, leave the territory, make your statement, but first we need to see Thomas. We need to know he's alive and unharmed. Of course. I understand a parent's concern. Holloway gestured magnanimously. I'll arrange for you to see the boy this afternoon, once the documents are prepared and signed. You have my word. Your word. Eleanor let bitterness seep into her tone. Forgive me if I find that insufficient, given how you obtained our cooperation. You kidnapped my son, Mr. Holloway. You threatened a child to force our surrender. I did no such thing. Holloway's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. Your son disappeared while trespassing on dangerous territory. If he's been found, and I'm not saying he has, it would be as a courtesy to return him to his parents. A courtesy that requires we surrender everything we own. Caleb leaned forward. Tell me, how many other families have you extended this same courtesy to? How many people have you terrorized into selling? Terrorized is such a strong word. I prefer to think of it as providing opportunities for wise financial decisions. Holloway poured himself whiskey, completely at ease. This territory is being civilized, Mr. Mercer. People like you, clinging to outdated notions of independence and self-sufficiency, you're obstacles to progress. I'm simply helping remove those obstacles. By killing Clara Mercer? Eleanor's voice shook with controlled rage. Was murdering an innocent woman part of your vision for progress? Holloway's expression hardened. Clara's death was an accident, a tragic, unfortunate accident. Was it? Or did you arrange it when she refused to sell, when she stood in the way of your grand plans? Eleanor pressed harder, aware of the device recording every word. How did you do it? Pay someone to spook her horse? Push her off that cliff yourself? You're treading on dangerous ground, Mrs. Mercer. Holloway set down his glass with careful precision. Making wild accusations without proof. Then prove me wrong. Tell me exactly what happened the day Clara died. Tell me where you were, what you were doing. Eleanor saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or calculation. Unless you can't, because you were too busy arranging her murder. Enough, Holloway stood, his pleasant mask finally slipping. You come into my home, accept my mercy, then have the audacity to accuse me of crimes you cannot prove. Perhaps I've been too generous. Perhaps your son's safety isn't the leverage you think it is. It's the only leverage you have, Caleb said quietly. Without Thomas, you're just a bully making threats. With him, you think you own us. But what happens after we sign? What's to stop you from killing him anyway, eliminating the witness who could testify about his kidnapping? The boy knows nothing. He's been blindfolded, kept isolated. Even if he somehow survived to tell his story, it would be the word of a confused child against my reputation. Holloway's smile returned, colder than before. No, I'll release him as promised. Let you all leave with your lives, if not your dignity. I'm not a monster, despite what you seem to think. Just a murderer and a kidnapper. Eleanor stood facing him directly. A man who poisons horses and burns barns and destroys families to feed his greed. What does that make you if not a monster? Holloway moved so fast Eleanor barely saw it, his hand cracking across her face with enough force to knock her back into her chair. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Caleb roar and lunge, heard the click of guns being cocked as Holloway's guards intervened. You forget your place. Holloway hissed, standing over her. You're nothing, a poor widow with too many children and too much pride. I could end you right now, bury you so deep no one would ever find the bodies. The only reason you're still breathing is because I find this game amusing. Then let's end the game. Eleanor tasted blood where her lip had split, but kept her voice steady. Tell us where Thomas is. Let us see him. Verify he's alive. Then we'll sign whatever you want. Holloway studied her for a long moment, then gestured to one of his men. Bring the wagon around. We're taking our guests to see their son. But understand this. Any tricks, any attempts at rescue, and the boy dies. Slowly, painfully, while you watch. They were loaded into a covered wagon, Holloway and 2 armed guards accompanying them. Marshal Wade and his deputies would be following at a distance, Eleanor reminded herself. Help was close. They just had to stay alive long enough for it to arrive. The wagon rolled through unfamiliar territory, climbing into the hills north of Holloway's ranch. Eleanor tried to mark landmarks, count turns, anything that might help rescuers find this place later. Beside her, Caleb sat rigid with tension, his jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, the wagon stopped. They were in a narrow canyon, steep walls rising on either side, with a crude cabin built against the rock face. Smoke rose from the chimney, and 2 more guards stood watch at the door. Your son is inside, Holloway said, climbing down. You can see him. Confirm he's alive. Then we return to my ranch and complete our business. Eleanor's legs shook as she climbed from the wagon, but she forced herself to walk steadily toward the cabin. The guards stepped aside, and she pushed open the door to find Thomas, alive, sitting on a rough cot with his hands bound, his face bruised and one eye swollen shut, but alive. Their eyes met, and Eleanor saw relief and shame and fear all warring in his expression. Mama, he croaked, I'm sorry. I tried to fight them, tried to keep the papers safe, but there were too many, and I... Hush. Eleanor crossed the space and pulled him into her arms, feeling his thin frame shake with sobs. You did everything right. You were so brave, so strong. I'm here now. We're going to fix this. Behind her, Caleb filled the doorway, his expression murderous as he took in Thomas's condition. You bastard. He's just a boy. A boy who made poor choices, Holloway replied from outside. He'll heal, assuming his parents cooperate fully. He paused. You've seen him. He's alive. Now we go back and complete our transaction. Let me clean his wounds first, Eleanor said, not releasing Thomas. Let me tend to my son. You have 5 minutes. Holloway's tone brooked no argument. Then we leave, with or without maternal comfort. Eleanor used those 5 minutes to whisper urgently to Thomas. Help is coming. Federal marshals are tracking us. When the shooting starts, and it will, you get down and stay down. Understand? Thomas nodded against her shoulder. I knew you'd come. I knew you wouldn't leave me. Never. Eleanor pulled back to cup his bruised face. You're my brave boy. Just a little longer now. Holloway's voice cut through the moment. Time's up. Let's go. Eleanor kissed Thomas's forehead and stood, her heart breaking to leave him, but knowing rescue was imminent. She and Caleb were herded back to the wagon, the guards' guns making resistance impossible. As they pulled away from the cabin, Eleanor prayed silently that Wade and his men had tracked them successfully, that help was indeed coming. The wagon had barely traveled 100 yards when shots rang out. The driver jerked and fell, the horses screaming and rearing. More gunfire erupted from the canyon walls. Marshal Wade's deputies, Eleanor realized, positioned for ambush. Holloway's guards returned fire, the wagon providing scant cover. Down! Caleb shoved Eleanor to the wagon bed as bullets whined overhead. She caught a glimpse of Holloway diving behind a rock, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. The firefight was brief but intense. Wade's voice boomed across the canyon. Federal Marshal, drop your weapons and surrender. You're surrounded. Holloway's men, realizing they were outnumbered and outgunned, threw down their rifles. But Holloway himself pulled a pistol and fired wildly toward where Wade's voice had come from. Return fire cracked, and Holloway went down with a scream, clutching his shoulder. Then it was over. The sudden silence almost as shocking as the violence. Wade emerged from cover, his deputies rounding up Holloway's men. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, you hurt?" "We're fine." Eleanor scrambled from the wagon. "But Thomas, he's in the cabin back there, still tied up." "Go get your boy." Wade smiled grimly. "We've got this handled." Eleanor ran, Caleb beside her, back toward the cabin where Thomas waited. The guards had fled during the shooting, leaving the door wide open. Thomas sat exactly where they'd left him, his eyes wide with shock. "Is it over?" he asked as Eleanor cut his bonds with shaking hands. "Did we win?" "We won, sweetheart." She pulled him up, supporting his weight as his stiff legs struggled to hold him. "It's over. You're safe. We're all safe." Caleb wrapped his arms around them both, this fragile family bound by necessity and hardened by shared trauma. "You did good, son. You did so damn good." They emerged from the cabin to find Holloway being loaded into a wagon, his shoulder bandaged but his expression venomous. He caught sight of them and spat. "This isn't over. I have lawyers, connections. I'll be out in a week." "Actually, you won't." Marshal Wade held up the recording device Eleanor had worn. "Between this and the testimony of everyone you've terrorized, you're looking at federal charges for kidnapping, conspiracy to murder, fraud, and about a dozen other crimes. You'll be lucky to see freedom before you're old and gray." "You can't. That recording is inadmissible. It was obtained under false pretenses." "Federal investigation supersedes local rules of evidence. And I'd say kidnapping a minor gave me all the pretense I needed." Wade's smile was hard. "Besides, half this territory is ready to testify against you now that they know you can't retaliate. Turns out people remember all sorts of things when they are not scared anymore." Eleanor watched as Holloway was driven away, watched as his guards were cuffed and loaded into another wagon. The morning sun had burned away the last of the clouds, painting the canyon in brilliant light. It was over. Truly, finally over. The journey back to the ranch took most of the day, Thomas riding between Eleanor and Caleb, barely able to stay upright from exhaustion. But when they crested the final ridge and saw the house sprawling in the valley below, he straightened. "I thought I'd never see it again," he said quietly. "When they had me in that cabin, I thought—" His voice broke. "Don't." Eleanor took his hand. "Don't think about what might have been. Think about what is. You're home. You're safe. The monsters are in chains." The children poured out of the house as they rode into the yard, Grace screaming Thomas's name, the twins dancing with excitement, Sarah running so fast she nearly fell. They swarmed their brother with questions and hugs and tears, and Eleanor stood back watching, her own tears flowing freely. Mrs. Foster appeared on the porch, her stern face crumpling with relief. "Fool boy, damn fool boy, making us all worry like that." She pulled Thomas into a fierce embrace. "You ever scare us like that again, I'll tan your hide myself." That night, after Thomas had been fed and bathed and his wounds properly dressed, after the younger children had finally been convinced to go to bed, Eleanor found Caleb on the porch. He was sitting in Clara's rocking chair, and without invitation, Eleanor settled into the chair beside his. "Marshal Wade says the trial will happen in Helena," Caleb said. "Federal jurisdiction means it won't be influenced by local corruption. Holloway's looking at 20 years minimum, maybe life." "Good." Eleanor felt no sympathy, only satisfaction. "What about the ranch? The property he was trying to steal?" "Wade's arranged for a territorial judge to review all of Holloway's land acquisitions. Anyone who can prove they were coerced into selling will get their property back." Caleb paused. "Clara's father's parcels, too. Everything she fought to protect, it'll be whole again." They rocked in silence, the evening settling soft and warm around them. In the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. Closer, Eleanor could hear the children's voices through open windows, Thomas telling some embellished version of his adventure that made his siblings gasp. "I couldn't have done this without you," Caleb said finally. "Without your strength, your refusal to give up. Clara would have liked you, I think, respected you." "I wish I could have known her." Eleanor meant it. "This place she built, this legacy she fought for, it's worth preserving." Speaking of which, Caleb pulled a paper from his pocket. "I had Wade draw this up before he left. It's a deed revision, adding your name alongside mine as equal owner of the ranch. You've bled for this place, fought for it, nearly lost your son protecting it. It's as much yours as mine now." Eleanor stared at the document, at her name written in careful legal script. "Caleb, I can't. This is your home, your heritage. Our home. Our heritage." He met her eyes steadily. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Eleanor. Maybe we'll always be just partners in survival. Maybe something more will grow from this foundation we've built. But either way, I want you to know you belong here. You and all your children. This is your place now, too." Eleanor took the deed with trembling hands, feeling the weight of acceptance and belonging, and something that might eventually become the kind of love built from respect rather than passion. "Thank you for everything, for giving us a chance when we had nowhere else to go. Thank you for staying when running would have been easier, for being exactly the kind of strong I needed." Caleb stood, offering his hand. "Partners?" "Partners." Eleanor shook it firmly, then surprised them both by pulling him into a brief embrace. "And family, in whatever form that takes." The weeks that followed brought a slow return to normalcy, though normal now meant something different than it had before. Thomas healed, the bruises fading to yellow, then disappearing entirely, though the shadows in his eyes lingered longer. He went back to working cattle with Caleb, but now he was treated as a hero by the ranch hands, the boy who'd risked everything to bring down a tyrant. The other children thrived too. Grace blossomed with the security of knowing they wouldn't be uprooted again. The twins discovered a love for horses and spent every spare moment in the barn. Anna took to helping Mrs. Foster in the kitchen, learning recipes and household management. Matthew and James explored the ranch's vast acreage, returning each evening filthy and happy with tales of their discoveries. And Sarah, sweet Sarah, attached herself to Eleanor's side like a shadow, as if afraid her mother might disappear if she wasn't vigilant. "She'll grow out of it," Mrs. Foster said one afternoon, watching the child follow Eleanor through the garden. "Once she feels truly safe again." "I hope so, but I also understand it." Eleanor brushed dirt from her hands. "We've all been changed by what happened. Some scars take longer to heal than others." News arrived periodically from Helena about the trial. Holloway had indeed tried to use his connections, but Wade's evidence proved overwhelming. Witness after witness came forward, people who'd been too frightened before but now found their voices. The poisoned horses, the burned barns, the suspicious deaths, all of it laid bare in court. When the guilty verdict came down, it was unanimous. Marcus Holloway was sentenced to 30 years hard labor, his assets seized and distributed among his victims. His empire, built on fear and violence, crumbled to dust. As summer deepened into its full strength, Eleanor stood in the garden Clara had planted and felt something shift inside her. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long finally loosened its grip. She'd survived. Her children had survived. They'd found not just shelter, but a home. Not just an alliance, but the beginnings of a family. Caleb appeared at the garden's edge, his hat in his hands. "Got something to show you." He led her to a spot beyond the house where new stones had been placed, marking a small cemetery plot. But instead of a grave, a bench sat beneath a young cottonwood tree, with a plaque that read, "Clara Elizabeth Mercer, beloved wife, defender of justice. May her legacy live on in the land she loved." "Thought she deserved something permanent," Caleb said quietly. "Something that honored what she fought for." Eleanor sat on the bench, running her fingers over the carved letters. "It's perfect. She'd be proud of what we accomplished, of how we finished what she started." "We?" Caleb sat beside her. "Eleanor, you did most of the fighting. You're the one who refused to surrender, who pushed us to find another way. We did it together, you, me, Thomas, even Marshall Wade. That's how these battles are won, not by lone heroes, but by people who refuse to let darkness win." Eleanor looked out over the valley, at the cattle grazing and the mountains standing eternal beyond. "Clara started it, we finished it, and now we get to build something better on the foundation she laid." That evening, the entire household gathered for dinner, Eleanor and Caleb and all 9 children, plus Mrs. Foster and the ranch hands who'd become family through shared struggle. The table groaned under the weight of food, laughter rose in waves, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, Eleanor felt something she barely recognized: Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy in being alive and together and safe. After dinner, as the children scattered to evening chores and the adults lingered over coffee, Thomas approached Eleanor with careful steps. "Mama, I've been thinking." He settled into the chair beside her, looking older than his 15 years. "Mr. Mercer, Caleb, he's been teaching me ranch management, how to keep books, negotiate sales, plan for seasons. He says if I work hard, learn the business, someday this could be mine to run." "That's generous of him." Eleanor studied her son's face, seeing ambition and purpose where once there'd been only dutiful resignation. "I know we came here out of desperation. I know it wasn't the life you'd planned." Thomas's voice dropped. "But I'm happy here, Mama. Happier than I've been since Papa died. I want to stay, want to build something that lasts. Is that all right?" Eleanor pulled him close, this boy who'd become a man through fire and fear. "It's more than all right. It's exactly what your father would have wanted, you finding your place, your purpose, your strength. I'm so proud of you, Thomas. Prouder than I can say." As the stars emerged and the evening deepened into night, Eleanor found herself once again in Clara's rocking chair, Caleb in his usual spot beside her. They developed a rhythm, these quiet evenings together, not talking much but sharing comfortable silence. "You know," Caleb said eventually, "when I first wrote that advertisement, I was looking for someone to fill an empty space. Keep the house from feeling like a tomb. I didn't expect—" He paused, searching for words. "I didn't expect to find a partner who'd make me want to actually live again instead of just survive." Eleanor felt warmth bloom in her chest, tentative and new. "I came here expecting a transaction, shelter for service, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, this became real. You became real. This place became home." "Does that scare you?" "Terrifies me," Eleanor admitted, "because now I have something to lose again, and I know how much losing hurts." "Then we'll just have to make sure we don't lose it." Caleb reached over, taking her hand in his calloused grip. "We'll fight for it, protect it, build it stronger every day. The way Clara taught me. The way you've shown me is still possible." Eleanor squeezed his hand, feeling calluses earned through shared labor, feeling the steady strength that had sustained them both through the darkest times. "Partners. Partners." Caleb smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way Eleanor had never seen before. "And maybe, eventually, something more, if you'd be willing." "Ask me again in a year," Eleanor said softly. "When the dust has settled and we've had time to figure out who we are in peacetime instead of war. Ask me when we know if this is real or just trauma binding us together." "Fair enough? I can wait." Caleb stood, preparing to head inside. "But Eleanor, I already know what my answer will be a year from now. I think you do too." He disappeared into the house, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the Montana night. She rocked slowly, letting the chair's familiar rhythm soothe her, thinking about futures and possibilities, and the strange path that had led her here. She'd come to this valley broken, desperate, with 9 children and no options left. She'd married a stranger, faced down a monster, nearly lost everything that mattered. But through it all, she'd discovered something essential about herself. She was stronger than she'd known, braver than she'd imagined, capable of more than she'd dreamed possible. The heat that had defined her first days here, that relentless summer sun beating down without mercy, had burned away everything weak and false. It had revealed the core of her, the unbreakable will that had always existed beneath the surface. And in its harsh light, she'd found not just survival, but triumph. Not just shelter, but home. Not just necessity, but the possibility of love earned through fire. Inside, she could hear the children settling for bed, their voices raised in some debate or game. Tomorrow they'd wake to chores and lessons and the endless work of running a ranch. But they'd wake together, in a place that belonged to them, surrounded by people who'd fight to protect them. Eleanor stood, touching the rocking chair's smooth wood one last time before heading inside. "Thank you, Clara," she whispered to the night, "for building something worth fighting for. I'll take care of it, I promise." The door closed behind her, and the valley settled into peaceful darkness. Cattle drowsed in distant pastures. The creek murmured its eternal song, and above it all, the stars blazed in witness to everything that had transpired. The summer that had tested Eleanor Mercer and her family would eventually give way to autumn, then winter, then spring again. Seasons would turn, children would grow, and the ranch would prosper under the careful stewardship of people who understood its true value. And somewhere in that future, on another summer evening when the heat pressed down and memories rose like ghosts, Eleanor would sit in Clara's chair with Caleb beside her, their children, all of them, biological and adopted, scattered across the ranch they'd built together, and she would know with absolute certainty that every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of fear had led to exactly where she was meant to be. Home. Not the place she'd been born, but the place she'd been forged. Not the family she'd lost, but the family she'd found and chosen and fought to keep. Beneath the Montana sun, Eleanor had discovered that some battles are worth fighting, some lands are worth defending, and some loves are worth the risk of breaking all over again. The heat had burned away her illusions, but it had also tempered her into something stronger, pure, unbreakable. And that, in the end, was worth every scar.